Meet Elvis, and yes, you can probably guess why he got that name. Here at Jurassic World Kyoto, Elvis is our youngest Cryolophosaurus, and he has become one of the most requested animal spotlights in the park. Not because he is an impressive predator we house, but because his story sits right at the intersection of wildlife management, public safety, and responsible care. In this feature, we will explore the science of Cryolophosaurus, its behavior, its paleoecology, and its place in our Jurassic World program, including how Kyoto's habitat took inspiration from modern polar bear exhibits across the United States. Elvis and his family were recovered from the Alaskan wilderness after coastal fisheries reported repeated nighttime raids, nets torn, storage areas disturbed, and workers refusing to return to certain docks after dark. In Alaska, where more than half of the fish caught in US coastal waters come from, incidents like that do not just disrupt business, they threaten livelihoods and increase risk for everyone on the shoreline. When a predator this capable starts linking human infrastructure to an easy meal, the outcome is never good for the public, and it is never good for the animals. So our response was a controlled transfer, keeping the family together, relocating them into a managed habitat where natural behaviors can be redirected through enrichment, not conflict. And the name Elvis fits for another reason. Cryolophosaurus elioti is often nicknamed Elvisaurus because of its swept pompadour-like crest, a feature so distinctive it became the animal's signature. But behind the nickname is real scientific weight. Cryolophosaurus was the first major dinosaur discovery from Antarctica. That fossil was hard-won. Antarctica is difficult to reach, unpredictable to work in, and the rock can be frozen solid. Even so, paleontologists recovered the skull, vertebrae, ribs, and other key parts, enough to outline a large carnivore unlike anything previously found on the continent. And it reminds us that dinosaurs thrived everywhere, even the polar regions. In the early Jurassic, Antarctica supported conifer forests and long seasons of darkness, and Cryolophosaurus hunted through that extreme, seasonal world. Now that you have met Elvis and the real-world discovery behind his species, let's move into the next section, the description, and break down what Cryolophosaurus looked like, how large it was, and what his iconic crest may have been designed to do. Now that you have met Elvis and his family, let's break down what Cryolophosaurus really is and why this animal stands out even among early Jurassic predators. First, the name. Cryolophosaurus elioti translates to cold-crested lizard, a nod to its discovery in Antarctica. The species name, Elioti, honors David Elliott, the researcher connected to the initial fossil find. In other words, even before Jurassic World even reconstructed this animal, it already carried a legacy, cold, remote, and hard-won. And that discovery matters, because Cryolophosaurus has been one of those dinosaurs that kept scientists debating. It is known from a skull, a femur, and other partial remains, and those pieces and all tell the same story at first. Some parts look primitive, others look surprisingly advanced, which is why its classification bounced around for years. Today, it is generally considered a derived neotheropod, close to the line that leads towards more advanced theropods. If you've ever looked at Elvis and thought he looks a little like a leaner cousin of Dilophosaurus, you're not imagining it. In many ways, they share that slim, athletic build and even the primitive four-fingered hands. But the details suggest Cryolophosaurus came later. Its anatomy shows a more developed predator built for efficiency. In the field, the first thing guests notice is the crest, that swept pompadour-like structure that earned the Elvisaurus nickname long before Elvis ever arrived. On a living animal, we treat that crest as more than decoration. It is covered in hard keratin, and it functions as a social signal, a way to recognize members of its own species and communicate status without having to fight. That is important because disputes between animals with long saw-edged teeth are at high risk even for the winner. A display feature gives them another option: posture, show, back down, and live to hunt another day. In our facility, we see the same principle with Elvis's family. Tension rises, crest display appears, vocalizations change, and then the moment passes without escalation. Now, the body. Even with its slender proportions, Cryolophosaurus is one of the largest known early Jurassic theropods. A subadult is estimated around 20 to 23 feet long and roughly 700 to 1,000 pounds. Like all theropods, it stands and moves on powerful hind legs, with strong thigh muscles built for speed and explosive bursts, not long-distance endurance. Its tail likely stiffened with age as tendons ossified, creating a stabilizing counterbalance during turns and lunges. The teeth are blade-like and serrated, designed for slicing through hide and flesh. And while it looks alert and calculating, its eyes did not face directly forward, meaning its depth perception was likely not as strong as later hunters with more forward-facing vision. Up close, you will also notice a few primitive signatures, 4 fingers on each hand, and a brain structure considered more basic compared to later theropods. It is a reminder that this is an early blueprint, a predator design that worked so well it helps set the stage for what came later. Diet is where an animal care team really brings the science to life, especially with Elvis. As a juvenile, he's on a varied diet: insects, small lizards, eggs, small mammals, and fish like largemouth bass and salmon. As he grows, the program shifts to promote natural behavior. Live prey is introduced in controlled sessions, and larger food items like goat, antelope, and steer are used to encourage tracking, grabbing, and cooperative feeding dynamics within the family group. Even the ponds play a role, stocked with largemouth bass to simulate hunting behavior and problem solving. And we don't ignore the rough edges of real life. Fossil evidence shows Cryolophosaurus could scavenge, and some remains show pathologies, including signs that a carcass was fed on by another individual, possibly even a juvenile shedding teeth naturally while feeding. So when you watch Elvis practice those early strikes in shallow water, or shadow his family along the tree line, you're not just seeing a cute baby dinosaur moment. You're watching an ancient predator's design come online, step by step, in a modern, carefully managed habitat. To understand why Elvis and his family are treated as a high-priority species inside our program, you have to go back to where Cryolophosaurus was first pulled from the ground, Antarctica, and one of the harshest field sites paleontology has ever asked humans to work. The original fossils come from the Hansen Formation, early Jurassic in age, dated to roughly 196 to 188 million years ago. That time window matters because it places Cryolophosaurus near the early rise of large theropod predators, a period when the blueprint for later carnivores was still taking shape. The discovery itself was made during the 1990 to 1991 austral summer on Mount Kirkpatrick in the Beardmore Glacier region of the Transantarctic Mountains. This was not a quick roadside find. One team, led by geologist David Elliott, was working a rocky outcrop about 13,000 feet above sea level and roughly 400 miles from the South Pole when the first recognized remains. They notified paleontologist Dr. William Hammer, and what followed was a 3-week excavation under extreme conditions. By the end of that dig, Hammer's team had removed about 5,100 pounds of fossil-bearing rock and recovered more than 100 bones from the site, including key pieces that would later define Cryolophosaurus. It is a kind of recovery that changes a field season into a career milestone, and exactly why the species carries that hard-won reputation. In 1994, Hammer and Hickerson formally named and described the animal in the journal Science, establishing Cryolophosaurus ellioti, the cold-crested lizard, with the species name honoring David Elliott tied to the initial discovery. The main specimen, the holotype FMNH PR 1821, remains the only fully described Cryolophosaurus individual. It includes an incomplete skull and jaws, 9 upper jaw teeth, a long list of neck, back, sacral, and tail vertebrae, ribs, part of both arms, pieces of the pelvis, and multiple leg elements, including incomplete femora and ankle bones. It is not a complete dinosaur by any means, but it is enough of a skeleton to reconstruct an animal with real confidence. And the skull is the star. The skull is estimated at about 26 inches long, high and narrow, and it carries a feature that explains Elvis' name before you even see him: a thin, highly textured crest that rises over the eyes and fans outward, giving that unmistakable pompadour silhouette. Unlike many other theropod crests that run along the length of the head, this one spans across the skull, tied into bones near the tear ducts and fused with horn-like structures above the eye sockets. It is dramatic, it is structural, and it is instantly recognizable. There is also a reason we treat this animal as a living research opportunity. In 2003, teams returned to the site and collected additional material, and they even identified a second locality about 98 feet higher in the rock sequence, adding more context to the original find. In 2013, new Cryolophosaurus material was reportedly unearthed as well, though a full non-abstract scientific description has not yet been published. Researchers have also noted the holotype may represent a subadult, which means adults could have been even larger, a detail that shapes how we design mixed space habitats for Elvis's family as they mature. And then there's skull anatomy itself. A 2013 unpublished study suggested that the cranial cavity is preserved well enough to estimate brain shape, and that the anal-cranial details support a more basal position within theropods that some earlier comparisons suggested. At the same time, closer examination of skull bone fusion has revealed similarities in the snout and forehead region that echo Dilophosaurus, reinforcing that this animal sits near a fascinating transition point in early theropod evolution. So when you watch Elvis lift his head and that crest catches the light, you are not just seeing a signature look, you are seeing one of the most iconic Antarctic fossils translated into a living animal, built from a specimen excavated under some of the most extreme field conditions on Earth. And with that fossil foundation in place, we can zoom out to the world that produced it. the forests, seasons, and food web of Jurassic Antarctica. In the next section, Paleoecology, we will step into Cryolophosaurus' environment and reconstruct the ecosystem that shaped Elvis' species long before it even entered our care. When guests picture Antarctica, they imagine ice, wind, and a landscape that punishes anything that tries to live there. But the Antarctica that shaped Elvis' species was nothing like the continent we know today. In the early Jurassic, this landmass sat closer to the equator. Temperatures were milder, and even in the coldest months, they likely did not dip far below freezing. That said, this was still high latitude terrain, which means the real challenge was not constant cold, it was light. Long summers with extended daylight, then long winters where darkness could stretch for months. That kind of world creates a very specific ecosystem, one built around seasonality, short bursts of productivity, and animals have to make the most of good conditions while they last. Cryolophosaurus did not roam the most extreme zones. Their remains come from more temperate environments, where conifer forests stood tall and thick, and where the ground cover opened into woodland corridors, the kind of terrain that supports both ambush and pursuit. If you want a modern analogy, think warm temperate, frost-free forests and open woodland, environments similar in structure to parts of New Zealand's North Island, just with a Jurassic cast of characters. And there was plenty to hunt. The rocks associated with Cryolophosaurus preserve a community that still carry lineages left over from the Jurassic. Small weasel-like proto-mammals moved through the undergrowth. Synapsids, including a trilodont, browsed and foraged. Overhead, a small Dimaphodonta pterosaur, crow-sized by comparison to later giants, would have taken to the air along forest edges and river corridors. On the ground, theropod dinosaurs were the main event, and they came in multiple sizes. Some were small, roughly the size of a medium dog, the kind of animal that would have been the perfect target for a predator like Paleoephosaurus. Others were larger, including Gosalosaurs, which could reach sizes comparable to Cryolophosaurus itself. And like any ecosystem, the most vulnerable prey were not always the smallest species. It was the young, the sick, and the isolated. That is where a large theropod with speed in its hind limbs, slicing teeth, and a strong social signaling system starts to make sense. In a seasonal forest, you do not want constant injury. You want efficiency. You want clear communication within your own kind, and decisive action when the moment to hunt arrives. Even the landscape itself tells the story. This ecosystem was shaped by local volcanism, and the plant record shows evidence of wildlife activity within charred, qualified plant remains. Peat accumulation was rare, likely disrupted by those volcanic influences and frequent burns. In other words, this was not a quiet, stable forest. It was a living system with disturbances, regrowth, and changing habitat patches, exactly the kind of environment that favors adaptable predators. And that is the world we keep in mind when we watch Elvis and his family today. Their instincts, their feeding rhythms, their attention to water sources, their movement between cover and open lanes, it all traces back to a forest in Antarctica that was warm, seasonal, and full of opportunity. Now that we have reconstructed the ecosystem that produced Cryolophosaurus, we can talk about how we can translate that environment into a modern zoological space. In the next section, Exhibit and Habitat Creation, we will walk through how Jurassic World Kyoto built Elvis' Enclosure, and how we borrowed design inspiration from polar bear habitats across the United States to balance guest visibility, animal choice, and cold climate realism. Welcome to Jurassic World Kyoto, our newest destination in the Jurassic World family. We chose Japan for a reason. Island geography gives us natural isolation for containment, while the surrounding landscape offers something even more valuable, the ability to turn an enclosure into believable wilderness. Bamboo groves, coastal waters, volcanic cliffs, and the dramatic seasonal scenery make Kyoto feel cinematic before a guest ever reaches the gates. And yes, at first glance, a Cryolophosaurus in sunny Kyoto may sound strangely out of place, but once you step into our Cryolophosaurus Arctic zone, the idea starts to make sense. The goal was never to recreate Antarctica as a frozen wasteland, it was to recreate the environmental signals that matter most to an animal: cold air, seasonal structure, forest cover, open hunting lanes, variable terrain, and above all, water. Here, every day is designed to feel like an Arctic summer day, and Elvis and his family are right at home. In the early Jurassic, Cryolophosaurus lived in a seasonal forested polar world, not an endless sheet of ice. That means the most important conditions are not just low temperatures, but shifting light cycles, periods of cover and exposure, changing productivity, and the need to move between shelter, water, and open ground. When you watch Elvis navigate his habitat, choosing when to remain hidden, when to emerge on a ridge, and when to linger along the water's edge, we are seeing instinct shaped by that kind of landscape. So he built for that landscape. Rather than designing a simple paddock, Kyoto's Arctic Zone was developed as a large-scale predator habitat, part zoo exhibit, part immersive landscape, and part theme park anchor attraction. From above, the enclosure reads like a rocky basin wrapped around a central forested waterfall zone. At its heart sits a raised island of dense conifers and mixed vegetation, where cascading water pours down volcanic-looking rockwork into streams and shallow pools below. That center gives the enclosure a cool, secluded character, something between a mountain ravine and a temperate polar forest valley. The animal space itself is ringed by tall artificial rock walls that do more than contain the animals. They shape the visual story of the exhibit. Instead of feeling flat or exposed, the habitat is broken into a series of distinct microhabitats. They are open sandy and dirt flats for pacing, resting, and feeding. They are shaded forest edges for cover. There are elevated rocky shelves that function as lookout points, and there are multiple water features that keep the enclosure active and dynamic. Together, those spaces allow Elvis and his family to move in and out of sight naturally, which is one of the hallmarks of a strong modern predator exhibit. It is always really exciting when you first put a dinosaur into a new exhibit. We kinda get to see how the dinosaur interact with an entirely new environment. That first interaction tells us whether a habitat truly works. A successful enclosure is not one that only looks beautiful from the guest path, it is one that animals immediately begin using in meaningful ways, choosing routes, testing boundaries, exploring cover, revisiting water, and claiming vantage points. In Kyoto, every ridge, stream, grove, and open lane was designed to encourage that kind of choice-driven movement. And the water is not just decorative. We built pools, shallow shorelines, and flowing channels to support wading, cooling, scent tracking, and hunting behavior. In a habitat like this, water becomes more than scenery, it becomes a behavioral tool. We even introduced largemouth bass, a hardy fish species that is safe to eat and difficult to catch. For Elvis, that transforms an ordinary pool into a living hunting challenge. Guests can watch him pause along the shoreline, stalk through the shallows, misjudge, correct, and try again. In those moments, the exhibit stops feeling static and starts functioning like enrichment in motion. Largemouth bass are a special order because somebody discovered that this type of fish isn't susceptible to live fluke, a parasite that can be fatal to Cryolophosaurus. That level of attention reflects the design philosophy behind the entire Arctic zone. Every seemingly natural feature is supported by planning, veterinary science, and operational control. Even the water itself is managed as carefully as any life support system in the park. We take water samples from the pool every day to check the temperatures and pH levels. Every week, we also send off a sample to check for any unwanted or foreign bacteria that can make our Cryolophosaurus sick. That means the pools are not only part of the enclosure's visual identity, they are part of its husbandry strategy. For a species expected to spend time cooling, wading, and foraging in water, aquatic management is health management. To make all of this function in Kyoto's climate, environmental control is constant. Cooling systems maintain the enclosure at stable temperatures year-round, while the animals are given access to multiple microclimates throughout the habitat. Shaded rockwork, breezy corridors near the cascades, warmer resting zones, indoor cold areas, and snow-covered patches all provide different thermal options. That philosophy comes directly from the best modern cold climate habitats, where welfare is improved by allowing the animal to decide where it feels more comfortable. That is where our partnerships come in. Our team worked alongside Arctic Ambassador Centers, collaborators focused on research, education, and action programs addressing the challenges polar bears face in a warming Arctic. Their expertise helped us translate modern polar bear exhibit principles into a Cryolophosaurus framework, not by copying bears, but by copying what works, complexity, enrichment, and the best available veterinary, nutritional, and behavioral science. That being said, we do obviously recognize that they are Cryolophosaurus, and they naturally do still want to be cool, so we do have our giant snow piles. Once they come out for the morning, they will hang out here while I clean inside, and then we open the doors and they come and go as they choose. We have air conditioning inside as well. In our main habitat pool, the water is chill. That freedom to move between environmental zones is central to the enclosure's success. We are not forcing the animals into a single temperate band. We are giving them a range of choices, and that range is what makes the exhibit feel biologically intelligent rather than purely theatrical. The same philosophy shaped the guest experience. One of the most effective parts of Kyoto's Arctic Zone is how the viewing experience is layered. Visitors do not approach the habitat from a single fence line. Instead, the enclosure unfolds across several vantage points. At the front sits a formal public plaza, complete with signage, food stands, and a heavily themed entrance sequence that presents the exhibit as one of the park's major headline attractions. From there, guests move into viewing areas built into the surrounding rock pyramid, where sightlines open toward the main habitat and the central waterfall floor. the terrain does much of the work. Instead of relying on obvious barriers, the exhibit uses elevation, rockwork, and concealed edges to hide its containment systems and make the entire space feel more cinematic. The result is a habitat that appears less like a fenced enclosure and more like a secluded wilderness basin carved into the landscape. Stylistically, that creates one of the exhibit's most distinctive contrasts. Around the habitat, the guest environment draws heavily from Kyoto-inspired design, with pagodas, pavilion-style structures, cherry blossoms, and a formal plaza that feels curated, elegant, and unmistakably East Asian. Inside the enclosure, however, the tone shifts. There, the habitat becomes rugged, forested, and insulated, dominated by rock, water, conifers, and cold climate textures. That constraint works beautifully because the guest zone feels cultural and deliberate, while the habitat itself feels wild and self-contained. And just as important, the enclosure reads as a functioning zoo habitat, not just as a scenic set. Tucked into the perimeter are service access points, staff-only rock cutouts, utility pads, and operational spaces hidden behind the themed rock walls. Embedded shift gates and holding areas likely allow keepers to separate animals, clean specific zones, stage feeding, and perform maintenance without ever disrupting the guest experience. That hidden operational layer is what gives the habitat real credibility. It looks immersive from the outside because it is functional underneath. Some critics argue that large cold climate predators travel immense distances in the wild beyond what a managed habitat could offer. The modern answer is not denial, it is design. Today's best facilities compensate to terrain variation, environmental complexity, enrichment, water access, privacy, and training. There's the same standard applied here. Captivity always imposes boundaries, but a well-designed habitat can still meet an adult and juvenile animal's physiological and behavioral needs in a safe and positive way. We also carried over an important lesson for modern carnivore care. You do not build around image alone. You build around behavior. What matters is not just how Cryolophosaurus looked in the fossil record, but what it needed to do: move between cover and exposure, interact with water, investigate terrain, establish routines, and control its own space. And because Elvis is still growing, we made sure the facility could also support family dynamics. The care center is a separate staff-only complex dedicated to animal care, keeper operations, and life support systems. It includes a splash den with its own pool, additional nesting areas, and a maternity suite designed to support breeding and a family grouping when recommended. This zone is intentionally off-exhibit. It allows staff to shift Elvis and his family out of public view when needed, while also giving the animals the quieter and more controlled setting required during sensitive periods. For guests, however, we created observational opportunities that still respect that privacy. A panoramic glass viewing area follows the public face of the enclosure, while a central tundra interaction area allows for close observation during keeper-led training or enrichment sessions through a protected glass and mesh interface. These moments are not about spectacle, they are about interpretation, giving guests a chance to see behavior, communication, and animal care in ways that reinforce the ecological story of the species. Even the planning helps tell that story. Working alongside paleobotanical consultants, our landscape teams filled the enclosure with Jurassic-inspired flora, including tree ferns, ginkgos, while maintaining the colder, forested visual language of the zone. On the ground, we provided multiple substrates: straw, dirt, sand, snow, and grass, so Elvis and his family can dig, nest, burrow, rest, and reshape their environment. Because if a habitat is truly alive, the animals will try to engineer it for themselves. So when you stand at the viewing wall and see Elvis emerge along the ridge, crest catching the light before he disappears into the conifers while the waterfall drowns out his footfalls, you are watching paleoecology translated into built space: forest and open ground, water and stone, privacy and visibility, choice and control. Those are the building blocks of a predator shaped by seasonal worlds. And for those planning your next visit, Cryolophosaurus can be encountered across our global destinations, from Isla Nublar in San Diego to Cascadia, Manchester, Creta, and Sanctuary. But if you want to experience this program in its newest and most atmospheric form, and watch Elvis and his family move through a habitat designed to let them disappear and reappear like true forest predators, Kyoto is where that story is being written right now. Now that we have established the ecological design goals behind Kyoto's Cryolophosaurus Arctic Zone, let's move into the next section: Cryolophosaurus in Jurassic World, and trace how this cold-crested hunter went from a hard-won Antarctic fossil to a living asset in the modern park network, and what that means for Elvis and his family here in Kyoto. Jurassic World fell, not in a single instant, but in a chain of reactions. Loss of infrastructure, loss of trust, loss of control. For a while, dinosaurs were a global crisis with scattered assets, illegal transfers, emergency holding sites, and environments that were never designed to support living animals. And then the parks returned, not as islands of spectacle, but as a regulated zoological network. This is why Jurassic World Kyoto exists. This is why Elvis and his family are here, alive, managed, studied, and protected. Not hidden, not hunted, not exploited. And for Cryolophosaurus specifically, this return has a very real origin story. In our records, the only confirmed modern sightings of Cryolophosaurus came from Alaska, after a string of nighttime fisheries raids, nets shredded, storage sites disturbed, and shoreline crews refusing to return to deserted docks. That family group, Elvis included, was recovered during a controlled capture operation. And the uncomfortable truth is, an animal like this does not simply appear in the wild. It was almost certainly created and moved to black market channels during the collapse years, when oversight vanished and assets changed hands in the dark. Those Alaskan incidents were not just the first major public reports. They remain the only verified sightings of Cryolophosaurus anywhere in the world. Everything you see today across the Jurassic World Park network traces back to that original family group. After the Alaska recovery, our dinosaur control team used those confirmed animals as a founding stock for managed breeding and genetic continuity programs. In other words, the Cryolophosaurus you encounter at Isla Nublar, San Diego, and here in Kyoto, they exist because Elvis's family was brought into containment and turned into a protected, monitored population rather than being lost to conflict, exploitation, or eradication. That context also explains something fans have noticed for years. The video games were never pure fantasy. They were built from real animal profiles, real husbandry logic, and real operational constraints, pulled from the same world that now runs facilities like this one. For a long time, Cryolophosaurus was a deep cut in the public imagination. The Antarctic predator with the rock-star crest, known in science circles but rarely seen in the spotlight. It almost had a major moment in the Camp Cretaceous Netflix series. Early development considered a baby Cryolophosaurus for a central role, yet that concept was later replaced by Bumpy the Ankylosaurus, a safer ambassador animal for that storyline. Across the wider Jurassic media record, you can track that return by where Cryolophosaurus appears. In Warpath Jurassic Park, it showed up as one of the 6 unlockable dinosaurs. In Jurassic World Play, it became a dinosaur you could collect. In Jurassic World Game, it became a legendary tournament carnivore introduced on September 2022. In Jurassic World Evolution 2, it entered a system built around habitat design, welfare, staffing, and containment, and with its return in Jurassic World 3, it lands in a world where the public finally understands what we have been building. Dinosaurs are back, not as monsters, but as animals in a modern zoo network. Even action titles reflect how the species is perceived. Jurassic World Primal Ops listed as an epic dinosaur tied to the Dilophosaurus family grouping, a simplified label, but one that matches what guests notice first. A lean-crested predator with speed and presence. And Jurassic World Alive added Cryolophosaurus on November 2023 with Update 3.3, categorizing as an omega, cunning, resilient animal, game language, but a surprisingly accurate reflection of real behavior, a predator that wins with strategy, not just size. So yes, the franchise record matters, because it shows a long arc, from mere fossil to black market rumor, to the only confirmed Alaska sightings, and finally to a safeguarded population that now anchors our park worldwide, starting with Elvis and his family here in Kyoto. Thank you for watching this video. If you want more in-universe animal spotlights, please subscribe for more and stay tuned for the roulette to see which next prehistoric animal will be exhibited next.